to introduce Hristina Petrovska. She is the coordinator for the Food Systems Program at Kalamazoo Valley Community College's Food Innovation Center. And I was impressed of the first year we had Fridays for Future when we met in person at K College. And Hristina did a cooking demonstration after a presentation and introduced me to vegan sloppy joes, which I make for friends fairly often. And everybody agrees it's delicious. So I'm looking forward to this presentation. Hristina, take it away.
So much, Marianne. Thank you. It's great to be with all of you again. It's a little bit of a different space now, being virtual, but I'm so grateful for technology and still being able to connect. So I'm going to go and share my screen, and I will tell you more about what we are going to do today. So can everyone see my screen? Okay, thank you. So Marianne asked me a while ago to kind of do a similar talk as the one that I did in 2019, I think it might have been at K College, and focused on climate-friendly cooking, holiday. That one was just like just cooking climate-friendly meals, and giving it like a take on a climate-friendly Thanksgiving meal. And then she also asked me to think of culturally sensitive meal, and it made me really think about this. And you know, I've lived in the US for almost 10 years, but Thanksgiving is a relatively new holiday to me that I've gotten to learn about it. But in Macedonia, we celebrate with food for many, many occasions, as we do here as well. So Thanksgiving, Christmas, and many other occasions. And so I decided to kind of take a perspective from my homeland and some of the food that we eat around the holidays. Not necessarily saying this is what you should do, but just sharing how the food that we prepare around the holidays is meaningful to us and how it can bring us joy. And then how, when we find joy and when we find happiness around what we eat, we can think about climate and be conscious about it, eating it without guilt and without feeling like I could always do something better, but really finding peace with what we're eating and celebrating it. So a little bit about my background I want to share, and as of why this topic has always been of interest to me. So I am a registered dietitian nutritionist since 2018, and I have worked at Kalamazoo Valley Community College at the Food Innovation Center also since 2018. And at my job there, I coordinate community classes and education related to sustainable foods, farm and gardens. And so opportunities for the community to come together and learn skills around gardening, so self-sufficiency, sustainability, not particularly just cooking, but really all the things that we can do with our own space, with our own means, and kind of following our own passion. So some of those classes include beekeeping and mushroom cultivation, and we are constantly adding new classes. I'm excited for the next semester. We will be adding some additional classes that even include clothes mending and things like that. So that has been really wonderful. And then if things go well, by spring of 2023, so next April, I should have my master's in nutrition and dietetics completed. And I hope that everybody in this group knows, but Western has this wonderful program, Graduate Certificate in Climate Change Management and Policy. And I have been enrolled in that program since last fall, and I'm hoping to also complete it in 2023. And so this has been really kind of like a lifelong passion. I've been interested in food, but really interested in environmental sustainability, and trying to connect the two hasn't always come natural in my education, because the way that the universities are set up to teach something, it can get really focused. So when you study nutrition science and the details of all the nutrients and how they interact in the body, and maybe not necessarily how the food produced interacts with the environment and environment interacts with food. And So it's been really exciting for me to have the opportunity to go back to school and really focus a little bit more on an academic standpoint, connecting these two topics that are of interest to me. And I was born and raised in Macedonia, Southeast Europe, and moved to the United States about 10 years ago. And in this last 10 years, I've really tried to, it was really the formative years. I was 21 when I moved here. And then, I thought that I had many different learning curves of thinking oh, I figured it all out. And then just going down to oh, I don't know anything. And then thinking again, I figured things out. And this isn't as far as how people eat and what is the right or wrong way, and just kind of thinking and going into this different maybe learning paths that a lot of us have, but a lot of kind of what shaped me is my experience in Macedonia. And so I want to talk a little bit about how that experience in Macedonia growing up and the cultures around food and what we eat, how I'm coming to really learn that it has so much to do with how we care for the environment and how it can be necessary to focus on these localized solutions wherever we are if we want to have a healthy climate moving forward. Also, I didn't put it on here, but my son is turning 2 today, so I thought that should be mentioned in this presentation. I've been learning so much just being a mother and thinking about what the future of my child would look like and what are the decisions and things that I want to teach him. So with that being said, this is where Macedonia is. And earlier, before this meeting kind of started, we were talking about how, even just the idea of space and travel, it can be so different in the United States and in Europe. Macedonia is this little country. The name is not even on here because I zoomed it out to show the perspective, but it's Southeast Europe next to Bulgaria to the east, Greece and to the south, and Serbia to the north, Albania to the west. And it's relatively small. I think it's about half the size of Lake Michigan, so just the country itself. But the culture is really rich. And so these are some of the foods that I grew up around. Like bread is a staple. Bread is at every meal, and bread is made many different ways. Soups and stews are pretty much one of the staple foods. And then people love to sit around a good salad. And on a lot of celebrations, this little shot glasses that you see next to the salad is a homemade liquor that a lot of people make, and it's called rakia, and people sip it very gently while they're eating salad. It's a very ritualistic way of drinking it. So it's made out of a lot of people make wine because there's a lot of grapes available, and people make homemade wine, and it's kind of like using the byproduct of the wine. So rakia, I wish I had better pictures of it, but it's using the byproduct of making rakia. So all the grapes that are left over that are full of alcohol, people take them to a local distillery, and those are like really small makeshift distilleries, and they'll bring their 100 pounds of fermented grapes and add some water and distill it, and then take home the rakia, and then they would age it for a little bit and then use it like this with salad. And usually this kind of meal precedes the main course. So some sort of a salad. This is feta. This is tomato and cucumber salad topped with shredded feta cheese. These are some of the sites. When you are walking around in the rural areas, you'll see food is very, very apparent part of daily life. So these red peppers, I'm finally actually growing these in my garden now, but they are very common there, and we make a lot of recipes out of them, like specifically one thing that's called ivar, and it's a pepper spread that's delicious on bread. And then a lot of the different kinds of peppers get dried up and stored for winter. So a lot of these pictures you can see, it's like storage methods of how to preserve the food that has been.
No. Video or Zoom. She's doing a climate coalition. She's cooking today. You didn't know?
There is,
You probably don't have time. Do you have time?
these are some of the other, so this is like a lot of the food preservation and landscapes that you would see when you're walking around in the villages. And then these are some of the other sites that you will see. A shepherd with a herd of sheep. Oftentimes in the villages, people who have animals, the way that the landscapes and the kind of like the living structure is set up is that there's villages where people live closer together, but then there's the commonwealth around the villages where people will take their animals for grazing. And sometimes it's one person, one shepherd. They would take all of the animals and they would take them from one hill to another. And in these areas, it's very hilly, it's very rocky, and there's certain species that do really well in those environments. So in these environments, like having sheep is like the main source of sustenance for a lot of people. In other areas, it might be cows or it might be something different, but it's different with the region. And this is something I really wanted to emphasize today of how I personally sometimes have thought about, there's like, surely I'll go to school and I'll figure out what's the right way to eat or what's the right way to produce food, and we'll just tell everyone and we'll just solve all the problems. And kind of thinking retrospectively back about my homeland, thinking of how in some places there is only one or two things that can be done based on the natural landscapes. These are some other things you might see when you're walking around. You might just see geese around on the street, or people going back home from working in the field on a little like a little boogie ride. Those are all pictures that my brother has taken. And he's a photographer and has been working on photographing the different lifestyles in the different villages in Macedonia. And then this is another site. That mountain is also the mountain that you see back here on my back. This is really close to my hometown. And oftentimes you might even see like cows grazing soccer stadiums. So they'll be in the soccer stadium, in the soccer field, just grazing it because like it makes sense. And how else would you get the grass mowed? So thinking back, and then this is actually a picture that my father sent me. This little fence is a fence that he built, and he built it to protect his little property from the sheep, because there is just sheep that get brought from the different villages grazing around, and not all the time, sometimes. But this is just another side. There's a lot of places that are in the Commonwealth where people from the villages will send their animals. And so it's not, I'm sharing this because it's a little bit different than I feel like it's here in the US, where if you have a farm, you have to have land. And then if you want to raise your animals or food, you have to own that land. This is the Commonwealth. Nobody really owns this land, or if people who own it, they're not necessarily like actively, if they want something to do with it, maybe it's just like at the end of the season to mow the grass, to take it for hay. And this sheep will be a completely different location the next day. But he protected it because he planted fruit trees and he doesn't want the sheep eating the fruit trees. And he built this little fence. So, and these are some of the products that a lot of the people in the villages will make. So this is feta cheese, is different versions of feta cheese. But sometimes when people in these villages, they really don't have an outlet for that milk other than to really just do something with it themselves. A lot of the times they're in the mountains, or and so cheese is a product that they would make, and then they could either use, or potentially they could sell so that they could buy other products for their household. And this is, I wanted to kind of point out, I'm thinking of my homeland in Macedonia as like some lessons learned, but mostly the food that's produced is mostly in harmony with the seasons and nature, and the food variety and what we're able to eat is limited with what can grow in the region. So, you know, in the summertime when there's abundance of peppers, we make lots of things with peppers. We dry them, we preserve them as much as we can. But then in the winter, mostly people would eat what they have stored up or what can last. And then this is when the animal products kind of come in play, when a lot of the fresh food is gone. There's some animal calories. And my grandma actually, they really didn't have any external sources of food. Everything they ate was what they grew. And so this was kind of the cycles. In the spring, it would be all the greens that would sprout outside, and in the summer would be the veggies that they would grow, and then in the winter would be some of the animals products. And so recipes and culture was shaped by what foods are available in the different seasons. And so the different holidays had different meals that were celebrated based on what was available. Well, that's all great, but I've watched Macedonia change the way that food is grown there. And it's kind of like a time travel, because I think that Macedonia is experiencing now what the US experienced 70, 80 years ago with the globalized food system. But now Macedonia participates in the global market, and there is food imports that come from other countries. And sometimes imported food unfairly competes with local food because of the price, because imported food that comes from countries that subsidize certain types of farming that is not sustainable, it has a lot of externalized costs, can have just a cheaper price for people to pay in Macedonia, and might be driving farmers out of business who were subsistence farmers and growing food in a certain way for a long time. And yeah, and sometimes, like, for example, there would be meat imported from Brazil. What does that look like? Is that the same meat that was grazing on those slopes in Macedonia? It is not. It's not, because that we're not even talking about the cost of actually transporting that meat, but we're talking about the cost of really raising animals in a way that maybe animals were not meant to be raised. Or these are just some images of how the global industrial food system is shaped. There's a lot of animals being put in close proximities. A lot of forests are cut to create space for animal to graze, and then lots of fields to grow crops like monoculture of corn and soy. And so this is where that definition of like, oh, culturally people, have been eating meat in Macedonia for years and years, and it's been something that's been emphasized more in the winter months. Now with imports and cheaper imports, it's becoming more affordable at all times, and it's making it really hard for people to say no to something that's been part of the culture, but now it's sourced differently. And I think, again, this has happened, and I don't know the history exactly of how things happen in the US, but industrially, the US is ahead than Macedonia. And so this has been happening in the US. So a lot of the meat that we consume, I think the average is about 60 pounds of beef per person per year in the US. The majority does come from this type of settlements where animals are crowded together or grazed on, sometimes grazed on deforested land. And so it's interesting to see that the difference and the impacts on the ecosystem when meat is produced in a way that is crowding the animals, is polluting water, is growing grain crops in monoculture systems and tilling the soil. It's loss of biodiversity, depletion of water resources, deforestation contributes to soil erosion, and then obviously climate change impacts. Agriculture and forestry, they contribute about a quarter of greenhouse gas emissions worldwide, and that is the entire food system. But as we are seeing that the globalized industrial food system is really what's driving that. And this is just a little bit of the technical side of things of how agriculture is contributing. And these are the three main greenhouse gases that, if we're talking specifically just about the greenhouse gases. So there's carbon dioxide, that's kind of the obvious villain. It's used in all the machinery, and it's used for the fuel. It's even used to make nitrous oxide, that is the fertilizer, that then when it evaporates, it's also a really potent greenhouse gas. And then methane is from decomposition of waste and from animal production. And so all of these gases contribute to, and then the other thing that's not a greenhouse gas, but the deforestation. And when land use is taken into account, sometimes the estimates of how much food production actually contributes to climate change go even skyrocketing higher, because when some land is being deforested, then there's that much less carbon absorbing capacity of the land. And so, I didn't want to focus too much on that. I think this is something that's been talked about before, how food is a huge problem and how food can be a part of the solution. And sometimes when we learn about this, and personally, when I have learned about this in many different occasions and like had maybe a new realization, it can become really kind of depressing of like, well, what do we do from here and how do we go from here? And that is something that I think can be paralyzing. And I think focusing on what can be positive and what can bring us joy is something that we should focus on and think about. I don't know if it has been brought up in this group, but Dr. Ayana Elizabeth Johnson, who created that Venn diagram of like climate action, like what brings you joy, what is the work that needs to be doing, what is the work that you're really good at doing, and kind of finding that middle circle in the Venn diagram. And so I wanted to focus on some foods that can be special to us, but that they're either supporting good farming practices or they're reducing the amount of meat we use, because even though there is meat that can be produced sustainably, just like I was mentioning how in Macedonia people would eat meat only when it would be available in the different seasons, but then when it becomes available all the time, it's really hard to say, oh, this is the season that we eat this, because it's available all the time. And so if eating meat, finding farmers who support, I think the term now is regenerative agriculture. That's now what they were calling it in Macedonia. I don't think they had a term, but finding farmers who are practicing regenerative agriculture methods. And I'm not the expert to talk about regenerative agriculture. I know that there's people in this group that have talked about it before, but regenerative agriculture can actually be a solution and carbon sink. And finding joy in meals that don't always have meat. And so food, like this is a list, this is a really good book that I like, The Drawdown, and it lists solutions around food. And there's actually many different solutions that are related to food and land use. They list them like 100 solutions from the biggest impact to the smallest impact. This was done in 2017, and I haven't really seen anything else updated that's better. But the top 12 out of the 20 are related to land use in some sort of, so these are the highlighted. And it can be different in different climates. So there's no just one solution. Regenerative farming is on here, but there's many different solutions around land use that can be part of the overall kind of picture, and different with the different geography. So I wanted to focus on local solutions in the sense of what is it that we can do that it's not going to feel like every time we're doing it, it feels like we're going the extra step, but it feels like this is something that it's part of my culture already, or this is something that I can incorporate that I already like. And when I think of meals, everybody has different palate, different taste preferences. We grew up eating different foods, and so finding what it is that you like, and then shifting it to maybe supporting a farmer that you like, or reducing the amount of meat that he uses, or eliminating, like the Sloppy Joe recipe that we did. We used lentils, and I think it was really popular. And then this is a baked beans dish that's very popular in Macedonia, and it's called tafče gravče. So this is what I'm going to be showing today, and we can talk. I'm hoping to have some time for questions and while the food is cooking. But I wanted to talk about more why I chose this. I'm going to stop sharing this so that I can see everyone better. So tavche gravche is a staple in Macedonia when it comes to a holiday. Something that I didn't mention is that Macedonia is predominantly Orthodox Christian, and there's this Lent or fasting that people do before major holidays, before Easter, before Christmas, before St. Mary's Day. Like for 6 weeks, people like no animal products for 6 weeks leading up to these holidays. And tavche gravche would always be served on holidays that fall under in that time period. And the reason for it is beans they're resilient. There's many amazing things about beans. Well, first of all, so I have this like the actual beans that dish is made out of. My brother brought them to me from Macedonia. I'm saving them for seed. So if they do well, I can share them with whoever in this group wants them next year. But the amazing thing about beans is that you can grow them throughout the season. They kind of look like the cannellini beans or the Great Northern. And then the dry beans, you can store them. So unlike tomatoes or peppers or things that we have to process right away in the summertime, beans store really well. So it's calories tucked away that people could grow and put away and then have for later. They are high in protein, high in fiber from nutritional standpoint. So they're filling, and they are amazing for the soil because they fix their own nitrogen. So they have the ability to pull fertilizer, the nitrogen, out of the air and fix it in the root structure and bring it into the soil. So the next year, if you grow something different in the place where you grew beans this year, you already have some fertilizer already in the soil. And so there's multiple reasons why they're really practical to grow and also practical to have on hand. Back home in Macedonia, like every fall, we would buy about 10 pounds of these from a farmer. There's a village that I swear they grow the best beans. I don't know what it is, but there's like this one village that has the best beans. And that's where this came from, but we'll see whether our climate does the same thing with them. So again, I used the Great Northern beans for the dish I'm going to be making. Tavche gravche I'll be making today because that's what I had. This is all the other beans that I have left over from Macedonia. And it's very simple. It's a very simple dish that it's easy to make, but it requires specific ingredients to make it taste like the Macedonian version. So I'm going to try to show you how to do it in my little makeshift kitchen over here that I have. So before I keep going, does anybody have any questions so far? And we can put them in the chat and somebody can grab them from the chat later as I start.
Or if you have a question that you want to ask orally, everybody will need to unmute. And then please, if there's any background noise at your house, mute yourself again. But
Thank you.
Well,
So,
just a comment. You were talking about how in Macedonia they eat what's in season. And that's really what Thanksgiving was. It was in season with the turkey and the vegetables. It was a harvest feast. So it started out as a seasonal dish.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. Celebrating the abundance when things are available, and giving thanks for it. So what are we gonna need for this dish? I already cooked the beans I soaked them last night and I cooked them today because dry beans take a while to cook, and the best way to do it is to soak them. A cup of beans goes a long way because they will get plumped up. So soak them the night before and then cook them. So if you have a beautiful red pot with flowers on them, you should use that to cook your beans. If not, you can use whatever you have. But if you had a pot that you brought from Macedonia by any chance. And so actually, first thing, if my grandma is watching, she's gonna be really mad at me if I don't put an apron on. So I'm gonna put an apron on before I do this to do it right. Baba, if you're watching, be proud. So, all right. So these are the beans. So I put the beans, I soak them. And then I just changed the water that I was soaking them in, and I put a carrot and the dry pepper, and I'll show you the dry pepper. It's actually the ones that you saw in the pictures. The first pictures I show when there was peppers drying on the houses. It's these peppers. They are, they're not hot, they're sweet, they're mild. And I'm very lucky because my father from Macedonia dries them every year and then very carefully removes all the seeds from them and piles them together in a bag so that I can take them here without them taking too much space in my suitcase. So I use these dry peppers. You can use something else or can omit it completely. Again, this is something that is what people have around usually all winter long. And so trying to use them in meals. And when you put things like this in the water, like in the broth of boiling the beans, it adds flavor to the beans. So we're gonna set this aside. We'll use them in a little bit, but I just wanted to show you kind of all the ingredients we're working with. So I already showed you the peppers. That's the other key ingredient. And then we have onions. That's like the universal food many cultures use. It's like you start with an onion. These are actually shallots. Onion, shallot, red, white, yellow. It doesn't really matter. We've even done it with green onions in the spring when there's no regular onions ready. So you can be flexible. It's just kind of like a little bit of that oniony flavor. And we need garlic. See, we're still pretty close to things that we use here often. So garlic, this is some garlic that I grew. And then I sent seed to my dad. So we're kind of exchanging seeds. So we need garlic. Okay, I've tried to make this many times after I moved to the States. And I would always tell my grandma, it doesn't taste like yours. And one time she watched me and she told me I wasn't using enough oil. This dish requires generous amount of oil. And so I'm trying to correct that sometimes. But use any oil that doesn't have a lot of flavor. So you don't want the flavor of the oil to kind of taint the flavor of the meal. So in Macedonia, we use sunflower oil. That's really common. We grew really big fields of sunflowers. That's changing lately too, but that's the one that is common. You can use canola oil, vegetable oil, grapeseed oil. So back in the day, my grandma, when they just raised the food that they ate, they would even use lard because that's what they would have as like a source of fat, because it's something that would last and it wouldn't go bad. So that's what they used when she was growing up in the 40s. And a few other key things. So I show you the beans. So we need a little bit of flour. This is just regular white flour. You can use corn flour, but white flour works as well, unbleached. You can use whole wheat flour. It doesn't matter. We'll just use very small amount, like maybe just a spoon. And this is another key ingredient. So this is paprika. Well, that's what we would call it here, paprika. But this is different than the paprika you would buy at the grocery store in the little containers. This came again from those peppers that were drying on those houses. These peppers. So it's made from these. These are already dried outside, and then they get put in like an oven on a really, really low heat to kind of like really crisp them up. And once they're really, really crispy, they get put through like a flour mill. And the product that comes out of them is this very fine, powdery, floury, almost looking ground pepper, paprika. And this is the key ingredient to making tavče gravče. You need and if you don't have this paprika, you can use another paprika, but this is where most of the flavor is going to come from, other than salt.
So you use the sweet, not the smoked paprika.
No, we don't use the smoke, just this is not smoked. It's just sweet. It's just been heated in the oven for drying purposes. You can bake it in any dish. So the one that I showed in the presentation was a big clay dish. I have these very small clay dishes that I inherited from my mom and dad. They had bought them. My mom was born and raised in Bulgaria, which is the country east of Macedonia. And they had bought them in Bulgaria. and they had them for many years. These are probably over 40 years old. And a few years ago, I was really lucky and I inherited them. So I use them for special occasions, but I would put the bean in here to bake them in the oven before we put them in. And I think I'm gonna try to move things around so that I can show you kind of the first step. So I have this induction burner over here, and we're gonna use that. Really, we need just a burner of some kind. So we're gonna turn it on, and we're gonna put just a regular. Well, this one needs to be specific for the induction burner, but you can use a regular, just a pan to cook your onions, and add the oil and flour and paprika. We're gonna do something, I think, like in the culinary world, and that's not necessarily my world, but blooming of the paprika. So we're going to bloom the paprika, which means we're gonna put it in the hot oil to get all the flavor out of it, because it's different flavor if you put it in a boiling pot of beans versus if you put it in a hot oil. It adds like different smell, different flavor. So I'm gonna cut the onion, the shallot, and we want to cut them pretty small, but if you cut them bigger, it's fine. We're gonna make a little compost bowl here to save to put in the compost. And yeah, I have some pre-cut already, so if this is getting ready for us, we can use it, the ones that we already have cut. But yes, we're gonna finally cut it. And this is probably really loud and not very pleasant. So cut some onions. You can do carrots in addition to this, but we've always just done the onions growing up. And this is heating up, so I'm gonna add some oil. And you're gonna see me like add this multiple times because my grandma's watching. She'll tell me to keep going, but we need it pretty coated. Well, and we'll add some more. Maybe it's hard to see. So we're gonna add the onions in here. And I'm not gonna add a lot. I'm not gonna add all of them. I'm gonna turn the heat up. And then we really want them to release a lot of their moisture and kind of get soft and mushy. Like, we're not looking for a caramelized onion. We kind of actually want to avoid caramelization. So we don't want to caramelize. And in fact, my grandma would always put a little bit of water. So we'll just add a little bit of water. And this will just help make them softer and mushier, like, because you want them to blend in with the beans. You don't want them to stand out. And then we're just going to add some salt. And don't be afraid with the salt here, because this is all the salt we're going to use in the baked beans. So be conscious of how much you're using, because it's salt, but this is all the salt we're using. And we will be it will help the onions suck the moisture out of them a little bit and cook them faster. And then we're gonna cover it with a lid, and we're gonna give it a little bit of time. And the lid again will help speed up the process and use a little bit less energy and make it a little bit more efficient. And
Hristina, I have a question for you
Yeah.
from the chat. Just to confirm, is the red pepper you used in boiling the beans the same as you were using for the paprika?
yes, it is 100%. Yep. So this pepper that I used in boiling the beans is the same that they would use to make the paprika.
Okay, thanks.
Same pepper. Yes. And I thought I had all my setup ready, and I just realized my wooden spoon. So I'll be right back. I'm just grabbing my wooden spoon to stir the beans, stir the onions. So we're gonna stir this a little bit, and we'll wait once some of the water evaporates and the onions are softer. I will add a little bit more oil, and I will show you what that should look like when we're at that point. This is a good spot for questions if anybody has questions.
And because I can't see you all at once, just raise your hand some way or blurt it out.
Oh, thanks for sharing, Crystal, the Venn diagram link. And Steve, yes, you need to go to Macedonia. Okay, the name of the dish, it's called tafce grafce. And I'm gonna write it here. And what it means, tafce means like a baking dish in Macedonia, tafce. Grafce, so graf is actually beans. And in Macedonia, I didn't mention, but this is like the main bean that we eat. So there's not a whole lot of variety of beans. There is some, but this is the main bean. Like if somebody says I'm eating beans, this is what they mean. And grafce is like a cute version of graf. Like you can make graf or you can make grafce. When it's not a holiday and when it's not a special occasion, we would make just a soup out of this. So similar concept, similar ingredients, but instead of reducing it and baking it in a pot, in a little like baking dish, you would make a soup, and this would usually yield more. Oh, good question. Any idea of quantities? I will make an attempt to actually write the recipe and send it to everyone. I thought about it beforehand, and it will be just the best estimate because I never learned this with quantities. And so it's one of those things, there's not really like right or wrong way. I will share the recipe with roundabout quantities, and then share with everyone. Marianne, if I send it to you, can you distribute to everyone?
Yes,
Okay,
we'll post it with the Fridays for Future information.
perfect. I can make it like a Google Doc and then it can be sent to everyone. Oh, Dr. Weber, have you experimented drying sweet peppers grown in this part of the US? I have not, but I actually have been thinking about it. And if somebody has done it, please tell me your experience. My fear is that the climate here is too humid to be able to dry peppers like that outside. But I could dry them in my dehydrator. Kind of, is that what you were referring to, drying them in the dehydrator?
I think however you're able, but a dehydrator would make, is that right? Dehydrate?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
you want to dehydrate them, so that would make sense.
Yeah, I think that's possible. Actually, the peppers that grew this year were from Macedonia. They were a little bit of a thicker flesh pepper, so they don't dry as well, but the dehydrator will do a good job, and
Mhm.
I shall try it. I've been spoiled having access to these that I bring from
Right.
Macedonia, so but I think that you can totally do that. So, okay, so I'm gonna show you here what's happening with the onions. And how does time fly so much always when we do this? Okay, so the onions are pretty reduced, and it's hard to quite see, but you can still see what I'm adding to them. So this is where really like where all the flavor comes from. So we're turning the heat up a little bit to get them a little bit more going a little bit more. I'll add a little bit more oil because we're technically making a roux. So instead of using butter to make a roux like the traditional style they would make in Italy, this is like an oil based, and it has the flour and then the paprika that adds the flavor. And so I wish you could smell this, but if you've ever like added flour when something like this is cooking, it's very, very fragrant. It's really delicious. So we're gonna add about a teaspoon of flour, just like 1 teaspoon, and this will help bring it all together and thicken it a little bit, and it will make it smell amazing. My grandma would always just ask us when she would be cooking in the kitchen. She would say, "Can you smell it?" And like the time when we would say, "Oh yeah, we can smell it now," she'd be like, "Oh, okay, it's done." So I don't know how to write that in a recipe, but I'll try. So we're looking for this little, up to this point, it smelled like onions cooking. Now that we added the flour, you're gonna start smelling this like little bready, delicious, like it's gonna start getting a little bit golden brown. And then in this hot oil situation over here, we're gonna turn the heat down. So here's the other trick with the paprika. We want to put it in hot oil, but we don't want to keep cooking it. Once we add it, we want to call it good. We want to stop cooking it longer because it will burn and then it won't have as good a flavor. So this is sizzling. I'm gonna try to do this. So this is sizzling now. And I'm happy with the way that my flour is looking. Like you want it a little bit kind of golden, but you don't want it burning either. And I'm happy with how soft the onions have gotten. And I think that water and salt really helped. I didn't put any salt in the beans, so this is the salt we're using. And I'm gonna turn my heat down. And I'm gonna add the paprika. And when I'm adding paprika, I'm generous, like don't be shy. This is where the flavor is coming from. And so we're gonna be very generous, maybe just one. And we're gonna stir it. And this is again where in Macedonia, if you really want to know the word, it's called zaprška. So it's the word where like you're frying the paprika in the oil. This is a base for a lot of stews. A lot of different stews are based off of this kind of, this is the flavor base. From what I've learned about other cultures too, the different traditional meals, almost like each culture has their flavor base of like where their flavors are coming from in most of their meals, and what the seasonings are. And this is what the seasoning is here. And so it's simple, as I said, it's not complicated. It's not hard. It's just what, this is what makes it delicious. And so I'm gonna add my pot of beans up here. So this is the red pot of beans. This is how this looks like. So it's like, just like red, really deep red. When you wash dishes after eating Macedonian food, there's like they're all like red. There's not very easy to clean, but, and so I have this, there's a lot of flavor kind of sticking in the pan as well. So this is a non-stick pan. In Macedonia, we often use this enamel pan. I don't know if you're familiar with, but they don't do such a good job of like being non-stick. And so you might end up with a little bit of like crumbs still stuck to the bottom of it. And this is where if you wanted to, and I usually do, you don't have to, but you can add the peppers that you cooked inside. You can add them here and just kind of mash them up a little bit. And the carrot as well, just kind of mash it all up. And that will also contribute to the flavor. And you can mash it up on the side as well and add it in here. So for the sake of time, I'm doing it like this. You can even peel the peppers if you don't like the peel. The peel actually falls off pretty easily once the pepper is boiled. So see, that's the peel, but I like it. I'm gonna leave it in there. And now it's the moment of truth. So now we add our beans. And so I have a slotted spoon. The broth that the beans cooked in, we actually usually like would make soup out of it and use it. In this case, I'm not going to use a lot of it because this is a baked dish, so we don't want it to be super watery. But I'm going to put the beans in here, and once I transfer them, I will then transfer the mixture in my little baking dish. And because I made a smaller batch here of the flavor base, I'm now going to add all of my beans. So I'm going to turn it off so you can see. I'm going to lift it up. So here are the beans. Again, you can use a good bean, and you might experiment with a few different kinds. A good bean is the one once after you cook it, there's like the skin is very tender. That's kind of the key. Other than obviously the bean cooking really nicely and being tender, the skin being tender is important. And I haven't tried this, but black-eyed peas might also work really well in this situation. They are very tender and have good flavor. So I would say we can adapt to what's available here in Michigan for us. And I'm gonna grab one of my pots. Again, you can make a bigger batch. So I'm gonna put the recipe in for the bigger batch. so that you could put it in like a regular casserole dish. But for the small batch, I just have 2 of these, and I'm gonna pour my beans. And so right now, because I didn't use a lot of the liquid, they're kind of dry. And because I want them to continue to cook, I'm gonna show you. I want them to continue to cook once we put this in the oven, they're kind of dry. If I put this in the oven like this, it will get really, really dry. And we don't want it to get really, really dry. Like beans will just continue to suck up water. I don't know if you've ever, like when you make bean soup or add beans to chili or something, the next day they're even more like softer and they even absorb more of the, like, that it's thicker. So we want to be conscious of that, that the beans are going to continue absorbing water. So I'm actually going to add a little bit of the broth. And I just have a slotted spoon, so I'm going to use this method. I hope not to make a mess. But if I make a mess, that's also okay. And I'm going to stir it up a little bit. So this water, they will absorb while they're cooking. And if it's successful and well done at the end, I'll have a beautiful kind of crust on top of it. And I'm going to cook this in the oven on like 400. And I'm going to put multiple of these. So I'm not just going to cook one, but I just want it for demonstration purposes. So when you do it and cover it up, and it will cook really, really nicely. If you don't cover it up, that's also okay. You can just put a little bit more water, so like kind of count for the evaporation. Yeah, this is a lot of the times the main dish that's served in those holiday meals during the time like of that Lent period. And there's lots of different sides that are accompanied that are plant-based. Like another one that we have that's really delicious, it's stuffed cabbage rolls that are stuffed with rice and walnuts. But that would have required me fermenting whole heads of cabbages. Yeah, 350 in the oven would be okay. Or if you do it on 400, might just take about 45 minutes cooking time. So I'll include that in the recipe. I find that if you cook at 350, I think it's just like a nicer, slower process. If you cook it at 400, it will just get, it will be done quicker because technically this is done, like the beans are cooked. And so depends on how much in a rush you are. That's all I had. I know it was really quick and I wanted to show something traditional. Kind of hard to do justice in a virtual space. But thank you all. Thanks for being here.
Wow, Hristina, that was just incredible. I can't tell you how fascinated I was with your talk about Macedonia and the pictures that you included. And I could almost picture Philip of Macedon and Alexander the Great riding with their armies down from the mountain. It was wonderful.
Yeah, the city that I live in, it's like 2 miles from the ancient town of the father of Alexander the Great. So Philip, the city that he built, Heraclea Lyncestis, that's only 2 miles from my house. Thank you, Jenny. And
Wow.
thank you, Tom. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
And Steve has his hand raised.
Thanks so much, Hristina. That was fabulous. Just, I was sitting here listening and wondering if you're willing to share what your family or your townsfolk feel about the importance of thinking about the role that food plays in climate change, or just in climate change in general.
Are you asking about my family in Macedonia and just like people in general in Macedonia?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like if would they feel that this is an important thing to spend a Friday doing?
I will respond to Steve right away, but I want to just say to the question in the chat that Scott Pinkster is my husband, actually. Scott Petrovski now. But yeah, Scotty. Yes. Steve, I think that really to answer it shortly, no. The answer is no. And the reason for that is that the transition there is just like happening kind of like as we're speaking. many times I feel like I've been thinking like this, the way that things are changing there. Sometimes I'm like, oh, don't do it. It's a trap. We did it 70 years ago and it's not working out that well. But I think it's like kind of like inevitable that the way that and so, yeah, I don't think so. And I don't necessarily know how to address it, because you have people that are living this very, very simple life in like harmony with nature and raising these animals in like harmony with nature and like to the capacity that they know that nature can handle. And then you have the appetite for meat increasing as people are becoming more affluent and imports coming from other places. So, and I've been away for 10 years, really like my whole adult life, pretty much. I've been away from that conversation. So sorry, I know it's not a great answer. Yeah, Nikki.
Yeah, your answer, I feel that people who live in harmony with nature are more aware of what's happening with the climate than people who are urban or even suburb, because I'm sure that Macedonia is doing the same as we do here, where the seasons are actually changing. I mean, in Colorado, it was really noticeable. Here, it's not so noticeable, but I left there 10 years ago and it was already, you could see the change in the seasons.
Yeah, and I think from that perspective, you're right. I just, and maybe I misunderstood the question, because yes, the people that are actually growing the, working the land, they're definitely experiencing the changes and the way that the seasons and the planting times and water is changing. But when it comes to, and I don't know if Steve, if your question was like, when it comes to like actually making decisions or on how to farm, whether that comes about, I think Macedonia is too close to that. Like, how the Green Revolution in the US said, like, use this fertilizer and this, like, it will be great and you have that much more yields. And like, I think Macedonia is too close to that time period where these products were brought there and industrialization was brought in to make things better, like in the sense of like higher yields, that is experiencing some of the similar, like now it's hard to think of like, oh, well, there's other ways to do it, and facing similar barriers that farmers are facing here. And the farmers that are trying to do the, the small scale, again, they're being outcompeted by unfair competition. Rick, oh, sorry.
Yeah, great presentation, especially the insight of the native Macedonia and the environment, the way that looks there. I'm for those of us who might not be able to make this very often, is there a place that might serve something like this that we might be able to go to buy or take out or anything, Zaruma or anything?
I wish, not in Kalamazoo, not that I know of. And if somebody finds it, you tell me, okay? Because I know that that Detroit has a lot of Macedonians. Dearborn area has a Macedonian community, and they have restaurants. And I don't know of a particular one, but they can be found. In fact, somebody from Dearborn just brought me another delicious savory pastry that I've been missing this whole time, and she got it in Dearborn and she brought it to me. So I don't know, in Kalamazoo is like, I haven't met a lot of Macedonians. I know Battle Creek has a little bit of a Macedonian community. Grand Rapids has a Macedonian community, but not that big to have something like this served on a menu.
How about the culinary school? Do they offer anything there?
They have a regional focus, and so they do different, like every week they focus on a different region. It used to be international focus, now it's more of like within the United States, different regions. But not something that can't be talked about in the future. I would love to figure out a way to feature this and actually serve it, even if it's like another cooking demo that's in person, and then everybody gets to try it. Or some sort of a big community gathering where we get together and eat beans.
That sounds good. Emily asked if you're putting together a cookbook.
I feel like I gotta leave that to the experts, but I can. Thanks, Emily. Appreciate it. Gotta get my grandma on the phone here and help me out.
Uh,
Um,
The cooking school was raised, I don't know, maybe about 5 years ago. I had lunch at the cooking school and there was absolutely no vegetarian or vegan option available. I had to leave. And I talked to the person there and I was very dissatisfied with the answer because it was like, oh, that's not important. Have they changed that philosophy?
Yeah, so most of the like the days that they have meals that are served, there is always a vegetarian and vegan
Okay.
option parallel to a meat option. So I think that I think as things change and things get developed, that's available right now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Emily?
Yes, I love your story, your concern about the apron that your grandmother would be upset with if you weren't wearing. Because I was also taught by not only my grandmother, but my mother to wear an apron. So I always wear an apron, and it's not a habit that younger cooks are into doing. It's just a real good way to save a lot of stains on your clothes.
I agree. I have to admit, I forget to wear it often, but it is very nice. And it kind of like separates your cooking time from other times. It's like, now it's
Mhm.
time to cook.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Hey, is there one last question before we need to sign off until next month? Well, seeing none, I think you've gotten a lot of accolades already, Hristina, and a lot of thanks.
Thank
So,
you. Thank you all so much.
yeah. And we'll have to talk about the possibility of having a community bean meal.
Yes, I'd love that.
That would
I'd
be
love that as
amazing.
things are, yes. Well, thank you, everyone. Tom,